Nice to meet you all, and thanks for letting me be part of this. When I was first approached about it, I thought it was a really cool idea, mainly because I went to Wake Tech. So it was, I thought it would be neat to be able to share my experiences and staying in my curriculum, my career path, and making a living out of it. I was fortunate enough to be able to stay in the architectural design field, which is what I went to Wake Tech for. I took the architectural technology program. And so it was, I thought it would be good to come back and share what I've learned from what I was taught in that environment to what I actually went through to where I am today, a 40-year career. I first took drafting in high school in my senior year. We started with mechanical drafting, learning how to draw with straight edge and triangles. And once you completed that mechanical drafting part, then you would move to the second level, which was architectural drafting. Since I only got into it in my senior year, I did not get a chance to get into the architectural drawing in high school. So I enjoyed the drafting I was doing so well that I decided to pursue that and went to Wake Tech. I loved it. I had a great instructor. I remember everybody joked his name sounded like a subdivision. His name was Hampton Fields, and he was an architect and was teaching there as well. I think the big thing that I want to express, a couple things, is that what we were taught, and I think this is a case for so many curriculums, what we were taught was not necessarily what we ran into when we got into the work field. Just to clarify on that, I do 100% residential architectural drawing and design. I don't do any engineering work. I don't work on office buildings or bridges. I do residential. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what I pursued, and that's what I'm doing now. I was at Wake Tech. The job, they had their co-op, their job placement program for the students, and a lot of the students that were there, they ended up putting us in engineering fields for our drafting experience for co-op and job placement. I ended up going to a company called Hazen and Sawyer. They were an engineering firm that specialized in wastewater treatment plants. It was an interesting job, but drafting wise, it was not architectural. So I think what happens at that point when I got into that, and I spent about half a year working for Hazen and Sawyer, but what I was doing was engineering drawing. And so since they specialized in wastewater treatment plants, all I drew were pipes and manholes, which is not really what I went to school for. And so I was not feeling a lot of love for the job personally at that point. I was thinking, well, this may not be the right path for me to do that type of just repetitive technical work. Just wasn't where my interest was. As I said, I went into architectural, and that's what I really wanted to do. So at the time, after I got through with that job, I actually left the drafting field for a while and decided that I would pursue some other career. Even though I didn't love working at Hazen and Sawyer, I still learned something there. I still learned a lot about that industry. I learned about different types of drafting and stuff that they were dealing with on their day-to-day basis. So while it wasn't what I wanted to do, it was still a valuable stepping stone in my education toward drafting and learning more in the field of drawing. So I ended up getting out of it for a while, but then a friend of mine from college, a guy that was in class with me, was actually working for a residential design firm, and they were looking for someone part-time. So he reached out and contacted me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in getting back into the drawing biz. So I jumped back in. I said, sure, I'd love to. And this was back when everything was by hand. We were drawing everything by hand. And I went into work for them and went in, started full-time with them, and I never left. That was my big step back into the architectural design business, which was actually, I was very pleased with. I mean, this is what I wanted to do. And so when that occurred, I was real happy to be back into it. Before all that occurred, I had done some freelance work on my own. While I was working at the engineering firm and doing some other odd jobs, I'd worked for an architect who worked on nothing but churches. And so while I was working for him, still more commercial work than residential, but I was doing a lot of detail work, cross sections, looking at structural situations for building structures like churches. And that's all he did. So that's all the kind of work we did. I did some work for him. I did a little small stint at Roebuck Homes, and they were a production builder, a local production builder. That was an interesting change in that it was residential, but I was put into a, for lack of a better word, I was put into like a bullpen of draftsmen. So Roebuck Homes had their models they built again and again and again, and they would modify them accordingly and then develop new plans. So I was one of a group of draftsmen that worked on developing those plans. And I did a couple of odds and end jobs for individuals, but you know, so even though I wasn't in it full time, I still kept my foot in the pool. So I was still doing some architectural drafting, and then my friend Steve got me back in with, the company was Capital Designs. And at the time, they were the largest residential design firm in the Triangle. This is when the boom was happening in Raleigh. They were very busy. We were cranking out a lot of house plans, a lot of variations in the styles of the plans back then. So we pretty much got, you know, thrown to the wolves. You hit the ground running in there, and you draft 8 hours a day, drawing house plans, working out, putting in structural, you know, elements, developing that plan from the ground up to the ridge. We didn't do just floor plans and elevations. We did the entire plan. We did foundation plans, cross sections, roof plans. We did all this. So that really kind of fine-tuned, you know, trial by fire, drafting that much all the time. So we did a lot of that, and I stayed on there for 2.5 years, maybe 3. I had worked my way up to being one of the senior designers with a group of people under me. And it finally got to the point that I felt I needed to leave. And it was just me in a 2-room office. I had a room with a drafting table, and the other room was a conference table and a flat file. And I worked by myself until 95. So for 9 years, I was a one-man office doing all I could to keep the work done, but I kept getting busier and busier. At that point, around 94, I started talking to somebody, brought on a partner in 95. And so the two of us were cranking out as much work as we could. I bought and merged with Carolina Home Plans, which then made my company even bigger. I went from 2 people to like 13 people. And we were a very large company doing a lot of work at that point. Again, all residential. We carried on until 2008, when the big dip hit, the big crash. And at that point, the company I had built for 20 some years pretty much closed down. I ended up having to lay off people that I had been working with for 15 years, some of them. And I went back to a one-man office. I'd say 80% of my builder clients went bankrupt. Or they walked away. So I eventually moved my office home, and that's where I've been since. From 2010 to present, it's night and day. Everything's bounced back, as you can tell. The industry is booming, from what I can see, despite a pandemic and a recession. I'm busier than I've been in 10 years. It just keeps getting busier and busier. It's interesting. I've gone through different phases of the type of clients I work with. When I had the larger company, I worked with a lot of builders when I had a lot of folks. Now I work mainly, I still have my regular builders I've known for years, but I do a lot of custom work. And I always have, but the ratio is different. The ratio is different. And I think what's happened is the market has changed because of the crash of '08, in that prior to that, it was an interesting balance of, if you look at 100% of the houses being built, I'd say 70% of them were done by individuals, custom builders, or small production, local production builders. And the national production builders were a smaller slice. They were moving in, because this has always been a good market, but they just didn't have a big a foothold. Well, when everything fell apart and they still had deep pockets, they could go in and buy all these subdivisions at, you know, pennies on the dollar, and they continued to thrive, and they continued to build and grow and take over more of the market. Now that things have reversed or have recovered, basically, those production builders have a big part of the market. So what's happened is that market for individual residential design and drafting, like people like me, is much smaller than it used to be, as those folks have taken over a larger portion of the market. That actually hurts, our job possibilities of someone coming out of Wake Tech and architectural technology wanting to get a job. Your mom and pop shops are few and far between, and where they used to be. And you could go to work for a production builder. Some of the production builders actually have the foresight to use local designers. As if you think about it, what's popular in the Southeast may not be popular in the North. Style may not be popular in the West. So they use local designers to do what's best in that market. Other firms, a lot of them out of up north, will design plans and just ship them down. And so whatever the plan is they're building up there, it's a good bread and butter plan. They'll bring down here and they'll build and hope that it still captures that same market share that it did up there. So that kind of hurts the hiring, I guess, prospect in that those jobs probably aren't as many as there were before. I drew for years, obviously, by hand, and I enjoyed it. I really loved it. I worked hard on developing a particular style. I enjoyed working at the drafting table and doing that kind of work. And I went into the computer programs pretty much kicking and screaming. I think it's key that that the kids learn the drafting, the hand drafting first. Learn that skill set, that mindset, and then just use the computer as a tool to accomplish that. The computer will help with with some of the math and all the stuff that we run into, but I think it makes a world of difference. I have run into a lot of people or plans that I've come across, not the people who created them, but the plans where obviously it appears that the person learned how to use AutoCAD, whether they learned it on their own or whether they learned it in school. They took an AutoCAD class or they watched tutorials, they learned how to use the program, and they draw a house plan. That does not mean that they understand or follow any of the concepts taught in how to draft a set of house plans and the theory and the steps that go behind it. I'd much rather take a kid that knows how to draft and teach him AutoCAD than to take a kid that knows how to use AutoCAD and teach him how to draft, because he's already got a mindset of how he thinks it ought to work based on his computer program. And that shouldn't be, in my opinion, that shouldn't be the factor. It should be learning how to draw with a pencil. Just get that under your belt, get good at that, and then move on. The math that we use is really simple, and you'll see it when we do the problems a little later that we worked up. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's and I think it's because we're not working with a lot of odd angles, because the whole purpose of a house, it's got to be straight, it's got to be square. Your roofs can be different pitches and this sort of thing. There's where your angles come in, but you don't want walls like this. I mean, the very nature of what we're talking about doing and creating is based on horizontal and vertical lines and stacking and all this, with very little bit of angle, play in there. A lot of the math that I used to do when I was drawing by hand has now been taken over by the computer. So when you get into AutoCAD and you start using that program, it makes that math even simpler. So it becomes a much easier, simplified form of math. And so, I always thought it would be a shame if a child thought, well, I can't go into that line of work because I'm not good at math. And that's not really the case. It's not really the case at all. The math, you don't have to have really strong, extensive math skills to do what I do for a living. If you can look at something on a paper, a floor plan, and you can pull it up and see it 3D in your head, that is an important aspect. You've got to be able to see things in those perspectives, in those angles, that you can pull it up and think it through. You can look at a roof plan, like if you're a bird flying over a roof, and you see that plan with all the lines and the angles. Can you visualize what it's doing when you pull it up? And that's a key that I think helps designers progress and be better at their job. Do they actually have to figure out every angle? No, not when we're drawing in 2D, you don't. When the framer is framing, he's working out the information that I've given him on the plan and creating those angles. So a lot of that complicated math with angles ends up falling in the lap of the framer when he's actually building it. Our job is to create the instruction sheet that gives him the information he needs to build that. Another important key that, that the kids would need, that I stress is there's got to be code knowledge, building code knowledge. The building code sets parameters, and we'll have some of them in our problems, for what you can and cannot do. If you are going to design something that's going to be built, and that's obviously what we're trying to do, then you have to follow the code. If you design something that does not meet certain aspects of the code, they'll kick it back. You don't get your permit, you don't get it built, you don't get anything done. The way the code works, it is the same code across the whole United States, okay? The people say, oh, you got different code over here. No, it's the same basic code through the whole United States. What happens after that is, and each state modifies it to their state. And if you're, say, on the coast, you have all type of coastal things to deal with, wind, rain, uplift, things like that, that you don't have in Ohio. Okay, so their code is different. If you go up north, the frost lines are deeper, so their code's different. If you go out to the Midwest, Hurricane Alley, they have all kinds of uplift. You go to California, they've got seismic issues that we don't have here. So what you end up with is you get your code, and then you get a big fat stack of inserts that is the modification for the local code. The other key thing is knowledge of construction, how things go together. You've got to understand how a house goes together. If you're going to draw it and tell somebody how to build it, which is basically what a designer's doing, he's creating the instructions to tell the builders how to put this thing together. You've got to know how things stack, how they work, how load transfers come from the roof all the way down. If you've got beams stretched across up in the second floor, how do they transfer through the walls down to the floor system, down to the foundation? Critical thinking definitely comes into effect when we're doing renovations. When I've done several renovations where I'm starting another one now where people are tearing off 80% of their house and adding on to it. And in that situation, you've got to look at the framing, you've got to look at the structural points, you've got to look at what are load-bearing walls and not load-bearing walls, and you've got to be able to address the solution of how this works. Because what everybody wants to know is, can I do this? You know, can I come in my house and can I tear 30 feet of wall out of the middle? That's what they want to know. You got to be able to tell them, yes, you can, or no, you can't. And if you can do it, what are the ramifications? So it's that knowledge of construction and being able to find a solution basically in your head, or you can stand there and sketch it out on paper if you need to, but you've got to be able to handle that on the spot because those folks have called you out there for that solution.